Wow, man, what a picture. You're on some high test line out there.
We've got a really good connection. I do so much radio over the years, and now Skype seems to be the vehicle everybody wants. So, yeah, we've got some good resolution and decent bandwidth generally, so we can have a great conversation, I'm sure, tonight.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Doctor, welcome to the Edge program. Appreciate you coming on. It's your first time here. I've been following your work for a while now, and man, I'll tell you what, you're one of these cutting edge guys out there, bringing information that I guess people can't get in their regular news channels, and you know. We may not be able to change the system that's out there, but arming ourselves with information will certainly help us make better decisions, and just understand that if I've always said, doctor, if we're in a prison cell, at least I want to know what my cell number is. I don't want to be, you know what I mean? I don't want to be so
Right,
oblivious, and they're all there laughing with their scanners and watching me and stuff.
right.
Every once in a while I'm gonna flip them the bird. Look at the TV. TV's off. Throw the bird up there and just let them know, hey, I know you're there.
Right, right. In terms of privacy-related technologies, pretty much we're all in that squirrel cage, if you will. I mean, every electronic interaction that we have, everything that is recorded about us, from our credit card purchases, frequent flyer miles, I mean, airlines, all the searches we do on the internet, where we go, who we call, when we call. All of this data, virtually everything is tracked and utilized. And we've been writing about this, talking about this now 25 years, seeing sort of what was coming. And back in the days when we were starting this work, the advent of data warehouses had just come in. The idea of storing everybody's information, everybody kind of laugh about it, back then, because sorting it was just not possible. There just wasn't the speeds and ability to do that. But that's all changed. So now all that data collected, all the video, all the audio, all the digital data is now increasingly sortable, collatable, and interpreted in ways that are just phenomenal, almost in ways that would lead you to believe that there was some psychic involved. I mean, predicting your behavior has become so refined that with as little as 3,000 data points on the internet that you might search out, you can tell more about a person than they can tell about themselves in terms of what they're going to do and predictability, more than someone who lived with them for 20 years. These are pretty phenomenal technologies when you start to look at what and how these are being used.
Mm. How close are we to them knowing? Use myself as an example, I suppose. My next click.
Yeah, that's pretty close. And in some cases, they're there, just given sort of how you're rolling out your program, but more importantly, how they're rolling the program back at you. For instance, when you're making those searches in the internet and advertising and pop-ups and distractions of all manner are coming at you, and they're coming at you formulated for you
Mm-hmm.
based on kind of where your inquiries have been lately, what you're looking at. All of that is utilized to give you feedback that really feeds into your own belief system, your own sense of saying yes,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's really how it's done. Or in case where they want you to react differently, the feed is different. So it's really about gathering data more than it is about providing information anymore. Much of the media.
Some have said that there's a database being built to where they will emulate a user or a person or somebody they're following, and they could have a false internet presence of yourself with the minute changes to say maybe all of a sudden they're going to say, hey, I think chemtrails is great for my skin. And people say, hey, did he just say that? Yeah, so, and then, isn't that possible? Isn't that what they're going for here?
Yeah, actually, the idea of now, I mean, even sorting out evidence because the resolution is so good, and the ability to kind of sort it out is becoming more and more difficult. That's going to increase. In other words, being able to distinguish the real from the unreal, which is really what you're getting at. And even at a deeper level, there was a paper put together by the Electromagnetic Directorate of the Air Force back in it was like 2002, I believe, June 2002, and it's in their publication Technology Horizons, and the cover story was on what are called controlled effects. And this is the idea of three kind of levels of manipulation. First, attacking, computer hardware, where you create bit errors on the computers where information doesn't flow correctly, so things malfunction. Or you, at higher energy levels, create situations where you can burn out diodes, or literally alter electromagnetic through electromagnetic fields and pulsed energy of various forms, the circuitry. And then the third level of controlled effects is affecting the operator. And this includes, according to that article by the Air Force, things like replicating all five of the senses: touch, taste, smell, vision, hearing, and so on, so you can create artificial memories. So real you can't distinguish them from what you actually experienced. Or even utilizing the war syndromes, the PTSD and these things as ways to advance this experimentation, and they're funding it through the VA and other agencies to knock out memory sets, for instance, so that people who have traumatic experiences. And while it all sounds good, the other half of that equation is the insertion of memory sets that aren't your own, and ways of accelerating training. Now imagine getting your K through 12 education and a download someday. That's what's going to happen. That's what's coming. But then who controls that curriculum that gets dumped into your consciousness, so to speak? And who gets to discern what's right, what's good, what's bad? You don't. Your awareness doesn't. It just kind of, it's there. That's what's coming. And on subtle ways, it's already here. It's just fed differently. It's through the data feeds that you plug into voluntarily. And this is going to continue. In fact, this public broadcasting, PBS did a thing called the Worldwide Mind. This is back a number of years ago, and their take on the worldwide mind was the next jump to the internet is all the minds in the world connected, not through hardware, but directly. I think that already exists in in a metaphysical way, universally. But to do this artificially, then who controls that linkage and data flow? And this is, this is 1984 on steroids. That's where this technology is headed.
Well, Google claims that they'll be able to upload a human psyche, and I think, and I don't know where you land in the spiritual aspect of this, but I would imagine if memories are just simply bits of organic matter in the synapse of the brain, and they're able to accumulate those or take snaps, like we take a snapshot of a website and then upload to the computer. But will they be able to bring the essence? Do they believe there is an essence that is extracurricular, outside
that's kind
of that?
The metaphysical side, the spiritual side, the soul side of the equation. Can you extract all those, fields and data elements and assume that that's really what consciousness is? I don't think so. I think what you can get is a facsimile, a copy, that's one step removed from awareness. That's might even think about it as how your awareness and your ego sort of fight each other internally. So maybe you can export the ego, but I don't think you can export the awareness, that linkage to the universal on that metaphysical level. And as a researcher in science and technologies and thinking about this, the consciousness is way more than just a fact pattern. This is kind of the danger of AI as I see it. Without that linkage of soul makeup, that metaphysical side, that I don't care what religion, what philosophy, where you come from, if you're a thinking person, historically over millennium, you know this. And so the artificial layering, the manipulation of information, that's a very different matter. I think that's what AI is going to give us. But then it's going to be, driven by a very different kind of system, and one that I think lacks the universal, lacks the humanity, if you will, in that universal aspect that makes us, consciousness itself. I mean, we just manifest in this physical realm, but we do in a lot of others according to all of the advanced physics. You're kind of living in this one because we project through physical form. But think about it this way. Here's another way to look at it. You think about hearing, and we can hear within a range of 150, more or less the lowest range, to about 24,000 hertz or pulses or vibrations per second. But a dolphin, for instance, can hear up to 250,000 cycles per second. So because we can't perceive it, does that mean the sound isn't there? No, of course not. The sound's there, we just can't perceive it. Our meter, our tuner for sound is only in this range. Vision is the same deal. We don't see the ultraviolet and we don't see the infrared, but other species do, which is a broader bandwidth than the narrow bandwidth of visible light that we get. So when you think of the electromagnetic spectrum and sound and light and electromagnetic fields of all kinds are within this spectrum, it's about pulse rate and vibration, and we're a kind of an interpreter of those frequencies and wavelengths, which we then perceive as visual images, sound, and so on. And then from that, we put together our perception of reality. But it's more than just function, it's consciousness. There's something underlying that kind of links us. And what they've also found in this line of research, the whole mind effects thing, is that there's also not just the five senses, but there's another group, the sixth sense, this anomalous human capability, as the military calls it today. And then back in the 70s, they called it extrasensory perception. And back 2 millennium, they called it the gifts of the spirit. But these things have their sort of positive side and a negative side, because these are attributes that we as humans demonstrate in various ways. So like remote viewing is something that's been demonstrated in the lab. Telepathy has been demonstrated in the lab. Telekinesis and a lot of other things have been demonstrated in the lab today that's irrefutable. What was discovered in all of these researches by militaries and governments around the world was that what religion has said all along, that we all have these underlying attributes. And the thing that gets scary from a standpoint of government or a standpoint of organizations that would like to conceal what they do is transparency, And so think about if people realize their potential in just telepathy as an example. Transparency is kind of, it's like Judgment Day, right? I mean, if people all spontaneously had that, that's Judgment Day. Because you're going to have to be very forgiving of yourself, very forgiving of everyone else, because everyone's transparent. Now, I've had occasion to, in the course of my work and professional life, to meet some very gifted people in this area. And I've also met experimenters in biophysics, the best in the world, who have demonstrated this in labs clinically. So what did the government decide? How can you suppress these states of awareness, these potentials that we have? The simplest way is anxiety and fear. Think about it. First thing that kicks up anxiety and fear, and then what happens is your brain activates in a way of flight or fight response. You get what are called incoherent brain patterns, not the kind of brain activity that's associated with higher states of consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean that this brain activity creates those states. It's kind of supposed to run the other way around, but you can do this. You can alter the brain activity, and then you alter the chemistry of the brain because things start to react. And this is the essence of some of these artificial systems that duplicate what nature can already do. So when the government came out and with a lot of the experimental results, the things that they talked about were like the Manchurian candidate kind of stuff, and that scares people a little bit. But this aspect got sort of buried in the literature because this was where the real action was, and this is what scared them the most, because the idea that everybody potentially could do this, that's a little bit scary from a security paranoia point of view.
Well, then in that case there, they actually have to suggest that it doesn't exist. But somebody pointed out in one of the live chats we got going on that it sounds a bit like total recall. That being the case, how do we know our thoughts are our own, Doctor?
Well, this is interesting, because there's a whole theory out there that, this is all artificially created. We're sitting in some computer simulation somewhere. And you know what? If you were to use those kinds of words to describe the universal, it'd probably work out just fine, I mean, if you think about it, because what are words anyway but symbols for thoughts and concepts? So the idea of there being a universal creator, right, that you want to interpret as a programmer, okay, that's your point of reference. That's all right with me. But, no matter what words you use to frame that reality, it's still the same one. There's a created sort of something. and then we begin to manifest within it. And what we also know, and this is kind of interesting, is we co-create that reality. And the physics shows us, quantum physics shows us, we determine whether something's a particle, substance, or a wave, energy, by our perception of it. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a pretty powerful thing to contemplate. And if you think about it, again, rolling back to sort of a metaphysical frame, a lot of people believe, in fact, the big three religions believe this, you're creating the image and likeness of God. Well, what does that really mean? What does that really mean? Does he look like you and me? I don't think so. It's about, think about it like this. This is one of the theories in quantum physics that makes some sense, is a hologram. The idea that the whole thing can be embedded, no matter how much you slice it off, the whole thing's there. So think about that might be the image of God. Why would he create people like us that are so flawed and screwed up and do all of the crazy things humans do? Well, how would God actualize experience? Kind of interesting idea. Is it good? Is it bad? I think it's just experience.
Well, how close to the totality of reality can be changed? Are we talking about changes on the perimeter? Are we talking about wholesale changes? Say changes completely who we are, from say a man to a woman to a worker to a president. How much power would we have in that situation?
Well, I think, again, I'll default a little bit to the metaphysical again and go back to even the big three again. You get into this whole idea of what does that really mean? And who would have control of such things? And is this good or is this bad? I think my interpretation of this sort of idea of we co-create our experiences, I think that's very true. I think we could all agree on that. Now, how deep does that go? And where does the line cross where it's destiny or imposed on us? I don't think any of it's really imposed on. I think it's a series of choices we make, and how active we make those choices determine the reality we step into. And go back to even the words of Christ 2,000 years ago, greater things you'll do also. You had the faith of a mustard seed, you move mountains. Two or more gathered together. And actually, these all express principles also in physics. Because when two people come together, you get a formula. It's called resonance. X plus X in brackets with squared outside. It's more than the sum of the total. It's resonance. So it's, kind of a metaphysical principle. At the same time, it's a truth that's fundamentally laid down in the physics, which I think represents universal. There's order. We just might not recognize it. As fractals were a big thing, in the last 20, 30 years, people talking about fractals, and there's order out of chaos. And the further you get away back far enough, it kind of looks pretty orderly. You get back enough distance. And I think our lives are the same, but how we co-create and how we perceive is really a set of individual choices, changes of our individual perception, and then activating that in the world around us. And think about it. Whether it's religion, the arts, science, politics, usually start with one or two people just seeing it differently and acting accordingly, and then things change. Revolutions happen, all different kinds, through all different areas of human experience.
What type of technology do you think exists out there to sort of blanket humans as a whole, or do you feel like humans are being individually targeted?
The potential for both is there. Actually, a book, Controlling the Human Mind, that I wrote a number of years ago, we dealt with a lot of sort of the whole concept of what's called frequency following response and how you can apply that. And this is where the brain literally locks onto external signals, begins to mirror them. And through the flicker rate of a television screen is easily done. In fact, it's done kind of in the advertising and in just the way it operates. Because think about a person coming home from work, sitting in front of the TV, and the wife or husband who's cooking dinner are yelling, hey, 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 hey. You can't even get their attention because they're actually in a light trance. They're in a different, altered state of awareness. And it's simple. Everybody's experienced that, seen that. Now, you're not watching the programming at that point. You are becoming the programming. All right, you're absorbing the cultural messaging, the fears, the anxieties that the advertising, the news is feeding you, because that's the state of consciousness that you're in. Very receptive, and as long as it's not too conflicting with your normal beliefs, you'll just suck it in like a sponge. And that's all it requires. And if you add fear and anxiety into it, your ability to interpret that clearly will be disrupted.
How much of a role does fear and anxiety alter our state of existence, Dr. Nick?
It's the biggest contributor, and it's the easiest to manipulate from external sources. Like, I mean, even think of subtle advertising like deodorant ads, right? I mean, they make you feel uncomfortable. Am I one of those guys, you know? So, I mean, anything that creates anxiety, the news, of course, does. That immediately, unless you interact with those feelings differently, and this is another technique, if you will. When people experience emotions, strong emotions, negative or positive, as soon as you pay attention to them, you go, oh, wow, I'm feeling fear. You say, now you're in control of the fear because you recognize it and you don't let it take you. You take it. This is where awareness takes over ego, and now you're, running your own programming again. And this is an important aspect of some of the things that are coming at us constantly in the various really data feeds that we're each individually and collectively plugged into. So selecting all that is probably primary importance for dissipating fear and anxiety and taking an active role in what you think and believe through engaging those processes again.
We have this show's called The Edge, and so over time, it's been going on since 2004, so thousands of interviews. I've developed something called edgeisms, and one of those that I don't think we coined it, but we use it, is doomgasm. And so while there are programs out there that if you turn on, you'll get information. Well, yeah, there's HARP, and they're going to zap your brain, and we're all going to die. Or chemtrails dropping you down.
Right.
You can't escape it, so you might as well just start digging a hole, or just start running down the street. But now I can say the same thing, but I try to lighten it up a little bit. Say, yeah, this does exist. Yes, there's chemtrails. Yeah, HARP's out there probably trying to get you. I'd like the information, but I try not to project the terror, because the sad part is, Dr. Nick, people can prosper from that kind of projection.
Right, and this is a problem all the way around. I mean, you see it in just throughout our culture right now. So identity politics expresses that same thing. People's sense of needing to defend, I mean, even think of PhDs, what are they about? Defending their dissertation, which puts you in a position of not thinking about maybe expanding your thinking, but defending your position. It's kind of the wrong approach to a lot of things. And, I think we individually fight, our anxieties and fears, and the commercialization of that, I mean, through all aspects of society is there. It's exploited by religion. Cheapest way to get people, to put money in the basket, man, make them feel guilty and scared. I mean, it's the same thing in government, same thing in a lot of things. Buy a product because you're uncomfortable and insecure. The place is always starting individually. That's why there's such thing as sovereign individuals. There's foundation of sort of the philosophy even behind the founding of this country, is this concept. And that really, on a deeper level, and by our founding fathers on a deep level, a spiritual level, that they all held, there were certain rights that were just given as our birthright. And this is what gets lost in the way in which society and culture comes at us, because it is intended to push outcomes and create fear and create the kinds of things that'll push people into the herd, flight or fight sort of response, when the opposite by a technological society is required. Now, a calmness, a purposefulness, a meaningful approach to the responsibility we have as stewards, if nothing else, of this planet and the creation that we engage in around it. And there's opportunity in that I think is, I don't think there's shortage. I don't buy this shortage model of existence that, we're overpopulated, we're this, we're that. I've traveled all over the world. I've seen a lot of the world, and I don't believe that's the case. I think there's a lack of true humanity on the planet. I would say that the top 1/10 of 1% are playing a game with the rest of us that's become increasingly uncomfortable. But I don't think fear is the answer. It is about knowledge, and then really internalizing, and then each of us making different choices about how we want to play in the world around us within our spheres of influence, whatever that might be. And it's good for all of us to engage that, because the small things turn out to be the big things, and the big things turn out to be the small things, in my experience.
Well, I tell you what, Doctor, man, what saddens me is I know there's enough wealth and knowledge in this planet to solve all of humanity's
Right,
problems.
right,
You know, we could
right.
grow gardens in the deserts of Africa if we wanted to. You know,
Yes, we can.
we could stop the. You know, I don't mean sound like a '70s hippie, man, but we could stop the war, man. I mean, you know, the constant fighting is like, look, man, the animals don't do this, okay?
No,
I
no.
don't know where you go. I'm going to throw this out there. This might be a little irritating to you. I'm going to throw it out there. I don't think that the animals would ever deliver a baby and then, you know, like a little baby animal and then kill it on the table. I mean, I think they have
No, I don't think that's going to happen.
I think they have
And
more humanity than we do sometimes.
yeah, I mean, I know that certain animal species, a male will do that when the female bursts, but that's pretty rare. And you know, here's what I would say about all that is, again, that whole doomsday attitude out there that you see, and it's been, you know, I mean, I don't care when it is, you know, it was the millennium fever, you know, back in 1999. It was the communist threat somewhere else. It was this threat or that threat that everybody throws around that generates a whole lot of money for a whole lot of people. You know, the biggest fear is generated the military, industrial, academic complex, which now enslaved a whole generation of kids through student debt, and made sure that most of the money was spent doing things that really aren't in the average person's interest. They're not even in this country's interest. They're in some global corporations' interests that they've been able to extract and suck the lifeblood of many, many future generations. And this is what's really going on. And the empowering people, again, to recognize we're not in some big groupthink, socialistic paradigm. We're in an individual, creative bit of chaos, and out of it comes a whole lot of order if we would allow people to reach their highest potentials. And I think that's what's missing. People are so fearful at the top of being exposed for what they've been doing. That's the real equation. That's why the secrecy syndrome continues to grow. The idea of manipulating everybody's information and restricting people's ability to speak freely has become paramount to what I would call the new tech globalists of this planet.
Well, I never have verified this comment. It seems like it's plausible. It's been associated with Hillary Clinton in that she said at some point, and it may be just a hoax. I thought the quote was something on the order, "If I hang, we're all going to hang." But that goes to this immigration thing. You know, if I knew that immigration of people from the southern border was coming up here to do good, to work to build this country, and you know, I wouldn't mind. You know, I could see a borderless country. You know, but if we don't address the issues that come with that, then we're just sentencing ourselves to despair. And those people that you mentioned a couple times, one law for the uppers and one for the rest of us. We have to deal with the overcrowded schools. We have to deal with the taxes. We have to deal with the crime. They don't have to deal with that. And so they put these simplistic answers, let them all come in. But really, what they're really doing is just manipulating the masses, and they end up going to pit more groups against other groups.
Well, and there's 4 ways that you destroy a culture. The first and the most effective is war. Well, we're not doing that on our soil. The second is terrorism, which we hear all about, and people will give up security in exchange for some sense of safety in that environment. The third is economic collapse, and you always hear all of the stories about up and down, and we're eventually going to have one of those. And then the fourth is mass migration, where the culture's changed. So you got those 4, and so the 3 aren't really comfortable for the elites of the planet. But here's what's actually going on. 4 trillion people are moving into the middle class in the next 20 to 50 years. 4 trillion. That's 4 times the people that live in the United States, Canada, and Western Europe all together. Now, when you think about going into the middle class from where these people are right now, this is moving payrolls from $100 to $500 a month to $3,000 a month, which in those areas of the world are upper middle class. And then you see in the U.S. where the mature markets exist, where payrolls are going from 3,000 a month to 3,100, to 3,200 maybe. So the growth is there, and that's why during the bailout of 2008, when we bailed out all these companies and banks, they moved all their facilities there. And then people talk about, well, the declining population in China and Russia, it's going to be horrible, it's going to be terrible. Well, with robotics and AI, they're going to be ahead of the curve, because they're going to be extracting wealth out of AI and robotics more efficiently to pay for their elderly. And guess what? They're in the right demographic trend, And so 4 billion people moving into the middle class, 4 times the whole population of the West. That's why the money moved there. Now, the banks, what they did when we bailed their butts out is they bought more of their stock when it was depressed to shore up the price for their shareholders and didn't loan any money. $2 trillion went to them domestically, and $16 trillion went externally from the Federal Reserve, loaned to foreign banks at zero interest, so they could buy up dollars and keep the dollars and pay their debts, which are monetized in dollars during the downtrend. And all of those contracts could be fulfilled, and the dollar illusion could continue on. Well, in the meantime, the Pacific Asian Bank forms, and Russia and China get together with the BRIC, the big producers of gold and precious metals and real commodities and real wealth, and they create their own bank. So now you have all these disequilibriums, and guess what Donald Trump did? Donald Trump taxed for the first time the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters and all these guys, YouTube and all of them, because he instituted tax on their foreign subsidiaries, see? And they were off tax-free, so they could go and locate their intellectual property in Ireland, pay a 5% tax, and then they would lease that intellectual property to Google USA for the $1 billion in profit they might have made, move the profit over to that cost center and pay 5% tax instead of the 35% domestic corporations were paying. Well, when Trump taxed their worldwide income at 15%, he pissed off a whole bunch of people who control the data feed to the world. The Googles, the YouTubes, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the new billionaires of the 21st century, because they're not the old industrial services, data and information manipulation. That's the commodity. And now he taxed it, so he's got them paying for a ticket to the dance.
Yeah,
and they didn't like it very much.
Well, I'm still wondering how in the hell Amazon's not paying taxes. As far as I know, Apple sent an offshore account so they wouldn't have to pay taxes. These guys have been looting our government forever, and I'm sick of it. Hey, this is crazy, Doctor, but I found myself in agreement this week with Pocahontas herself. She says, Elizabeth Warren, break up the big tech data, social media, and it's really only on 4 or 5 of them right now. I'm telling you, they have way too much power.
Yeah, and they should be viewed as a public utility and not be able, like what they've been doing lately, restricting people's speech. They took Alex Jones off of YouTube and other feeds. And then what they did is when he went on with Joe Rogan here a week ago, they manipulated the data flows. So at 1 minute it shows 9 million views, and then it dropped to 8. It dropped by 1 million. This is all bogus. It was up to 12 million, it dropped back to 10. Now it hasn't moved at all in 2 days. This is the highest trending thing and doesn't even show up on the list till you get down to around 50. Highest thing in ever, for Joe Rogan, ever. Top of the charts it should be, and it's not, because they manipulate the data. They don't allow the free expression and free debate. They are the town square, and you know what? They're abusing their rights as a free press. They're abusing their rights and creating a controlled and manipulated technology. It's a digital doorway. They've kicked in the digital doorway to every one of our homes and looted it with the cooperation of governments on the name of national security on a platform of fear. In this, they have robbed us of the greatest aspect of what we are on every level, and they continue to. And this is when you start laying technology on this. What makes governments powerful in the 21st century is technology. What's making companies as powerful as governments in the 21st century is technologies. But nobody votes for these companies. Nobody votes for the European Parliament. Nobody votes for the UN. And this is fundamental to what we as Americans believe. The authority to govern springs from us, from living human souls, not from corporations, not from synthetic organizations and not from the creation of globalist concepts. It comes from free people, fundamentally. And that doesn't mean we impose our view of freedom on everyone else in the world, as has been characterized in recent decades. It's the opposite. I think we need to pull back and protect our true interest and be an example to the world to emulate if they choose to within their sovereign boundaries. You know, we don't have any interest in the Middle East. What do we need from Afghanistan, Syria, or Iraq?
A bucket of rocks?
You tell me.
I don't know,
Yeah,
man.
there's nothing there.
No,
There's
they're just
nothing
blowing out
there that
buildings.
represents our interests.
Yeah, that's
And the
crazy.
people in that region, they have enough firepower, whether you're in Israel or Jordan or Syria or Iraq, to solve your own problems without our interference.
Right.
And you know what? I think people should be allowed to. Why is 10% of the Latin American population trying to run, adult population, run to America? It's because their governments are as corrupt as they could be. Mexico is as corrupt as can be. And we have propped that government up by our policies and caused their people to want to revolt, want to run away. And when they've had revolutions, Yucatan, it was the Clinton administration interfered with that revolution. These people were entitled to their own revolution within their sovereign boundaries to choose what government they will have, what will reflect them, not us. And whether we like it or not, whether you have a theocracy, a parliamentarian style of government, or communism, or whatever you choose, you have a right to self-determination within your sovereign boundaries. And as individuals expressing yourself within those sovereign boundaries, by all means. You know, with illegal immigration, my answer is a little too radical, because what I would do is give them 10 weeks of basic training, a pistol and a long rifle, and enough rounds to go home and take their governments back. Because we don't need to do it for them. We just need to get out of people's way and let them do their thing within their own boundaries, just like we did. And just like we celebrate every July 4th.
And there's a big July 4th party coming up, I believe, Trump's putting on in D.C. Going back to Google and them, you know, when YouTube, I don't know if they were the first to censor Alex Jones, but a lot of people said, well, he's just a conspiracy theorist, so that's okay right there. But then somebody on Twitter said, hey, maybe Islamic people hacking people's heads off, not a good thing. Then boom, they were Twittered. Then somebody said, hey, I think chemtrails isn't, you know, chemtrails is damaging society. Boom, they said, well, that's conspiracy. And then you cut that out. And then now they're saying they're censoring people who object to vaccines, saying they're conspiracy.
Right.
In fact, this week they said they believe that the Russians are planting stuff on YouTube and Facebook saying that vaccines are bad for us because our government wants us to take them. And so they're saying it's Russian collusion. So now anybody who's anti-vax, now they're wanting to get them off the internet. So it's just one by one, they're deciding who gets to speak in this country.
Well, and they're coordinating a lot of this with now the Poverty Law Center, you know, as an organization to help them screen out fake news and who's to live. You know, this is the slippery slope that freedom of the press was not about saying whatever you want, but it is about that. And it is about us having differing ideas, because today's conspiracy theory turns into a couple decades later, turns into the facts. And this happens way too often because the guys on the edge pushing the news, pushing the equilibrium, those are the people that make change. And suppressing that free flow of information is what our founding fathers objected so strongly. It's enshrined within the Bill of Rights, because the responsibility to an invigorated public debate through dissenting and differing opinions was so highly valued. It was about that value, the idea that we could have civil discourse, big, powerful, strong, fact-driven, emotion-driven debate. That's what this country is about. That's what we need to get back to. And that's what gives us creative solutions. This identity politics and finding all the reasons we ought to hate each other is just the opposite of what this country was founded under. It was about debate, excitement of that debate, and then talking about solutions and evolving them together as a civil society in a body of law that all of us could understand. Now that body of law isn't the common law of juries and judges where juries could figure this out. It's 3 floors in a law library that nobody can discern, and you have to be rich in order to get justice in America, whether it's civil or criminal. That is not the way this game started, and that has gotten way too complicated to give justice and fairness in a system that was designed all around individual sovereignty.
Okay, let's take a question or two from our chats here. This is from Azur out of our YouTube chat. What's your opinion on the Schumann resonance, and does its variable frequencies truly affect the population?
Well, Schumann's resonance, first of all, has only been observed since the 1950s when it was discovered, and it's like the aggregate pulse rate of the planet, and Schumann put it at around 7.8 hertz. And UCLA monitors this, I believe, every 15 minutes. And it stays generally within that oscillation. There are some writers that I've read that say it's increasing, the frequency is increasing. I would challenge that and go ask for the data and where they see that recorded. But at the 7.8 hertz range, the natural oscillation of the planet, and it does change from a lot of factors, but the fact of the matter is 7.8 hertz happens to be in sort of the zone. It's right between theta and alpha, a little bit on the alpha side of brain state. And this is like the zone, whether you're a writer or an athlete, when you're performing in that spot where everything is just clicking along, chances are that's where you're at. And that's the natural pulsation of the earth. Isn't that interesting? Schumann's resonance. Greg Braden and others have said it's increasing. There are some, like I say, some variables. If you get higher, above 12 hertz, you start getting into a more agitated state. Can you create those states? Yes. You can oscillate the magnetic lines surrounding the earth with things like HAARP and change and broadcast signals that override the natural pulsations of the earth in higher frequency ranges.
Here's an interesting question. Doctor, what are those objects on your mantle back there?
Oh, I collect when I travel, and those are actually from Ecuador from last winter's travels, carvings from indigenous people, because, you know, those are lost crafts, you know, another generation, a lot of this stuff goes away, you know, and I just appreciate, you know, that third world art that's still out there when you can get into it and see it.
All right. Dreamwalker asked this question. What are your thoughts on the Mandela effect?
You know, here, I tell you something, Mandela effect, you know, in terms of geometrics, you know, that's where kind of my interest in science started, was the thought of sound waves in particular. When they interact in three-dimensional space, depending on how they're sent, you can create geometries. With mandalas, you know, they say with the voice, you can create mandalas. You can actually do this. There's a way to do this. If you take a speaker and then you put a rigid material on top that'll carry a vibration, like a drum head or something like this, you know, that hard material with a good stretch. And then you put silicone sand over the top of it, and you put a border around it so it'll stay in there. You can create sound with your voice, and you'll modulate those things. You can create all kinds of geometric patterns, including mandalas, and some of these ones with that sacred geometry that's applied through combination of sound. But there's a way to see it, visually see what your sound wave is doing in a physical way. It's also biofeedback. I'll tell you that. It's a biofeedback technique. If you're interested in these kinds of things and creating geometries with voice, this would be the way that you would learn to do it. You'd create something that gave you immediate feedback, that you could see it visually. So you go, when I'm on that, this is happening. You know, and this is the essence of biofeedback. But for sound, now think about the ancients, you know, figuring out how sound waves work. Because some of the things in levitation, look it up on the internet, sound waves and sound levitation for getting things to lift off the ground, you know, and move. Maybe these ancient structures we all see around the world, maybe that was as simple as it was, you know, command and control, you know, of voice. And think again back to the big three religious traditions, you know, in the beginning was the word, which is a vibration of sound flying into the universe. And from that springs matter, which is true. From vibration springs matter. You know, so all these things, you know, whether they're interpreted through an esoteric lens or a metaphysical lens, religious lens, if you want to call it that, or through a scientific lens. And I think what happens is as we learn, we see the order in the universe, and so we interpret it as science. But you know, I went to a conference years ago. It was called Religion, Science, and the Environment, and these were PhDs and winners of the biggest awards in science across all the disciplines. and religion was represented there, and all of the different groups. And there were 450 of us in this conference. And what was interesting at the end, that the consensus was that religion and science should have never separated. That the value expression and the symbology and the value expression in religion should have stayed with science, would have kept a better throttle on it, in the sense of making sure as we advance science, it truly represents values as well. And I think that's an interesting concept when we start to separate these things, because now we see science and biophysics, for instance, starting to bring things back together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your book, Earth Rising 2, it says, the subtitle, The Betrayal of Science, Society, and the Soul. Who's doing the betraying?
I see it as government mainly, because, and that then extends to really very self-interested corporate sort of structures that are benefiting disproportionately in a way that they control way too much power. I mean, stop and think about it. Do you think individuals can go in and chat with a congressman? My dad was a congressman. My brother was a U.S. senator. My other brother's a state senator. And my family has 3 generations in government. I can say, yes, they can. What can they influence? Most of the time, not in real terms, because they don't get time. Okay, well, who gets time? Who gets time with the politicians today? They're the guys writing the big checks.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Now we've created committees and oversight and all these things, to make sure there's no corruption. Well, that is corruption, okay? We just don't bring it around in a paper sack anymore. Okay, it's the same thing. Gets you access, influence, and outcomes. That's corruption. We just make it feel good by giving it a committee and a limit and an oversight. But we just create a bunch of regulation around something that still boils down to the same thing. The hijacking of a democratic republic in a technocracy that now has way too much power and way too much secrecy to yield it. Mm-hmm. And Congress, okay, and having family members who serve there, the number of scientists in Congress is a handful, okay, and they're mostly MDs. So they go into closed committee hearings where they can't get full information. They can't have aides. They can't make notes. They can't talk to anybody out of those committees. And they listen to a dog and pony show, and they don't have a clue as to what even to ask to get into it, because they don't have the knowledge. And yet these are the people charged with running governments, which are powerful only because of their technology. Mm. This is a big hole in the program, okay? Because we have to have an informed electorate and an informed public in order to tell our elected officials what to do. Instead, we've allowed the technocracy and the globalists to decide that for us, and the academic industrial complex that Eisenhower and others have warned about for over 70 years.
Well, think about this, Dr. Nick. We have somebody in Congress whose idea to recreate the entire planet into a Green New Deal has the payment, the financial end of that is quote, you just pay for it. Then we have somebody else that, I don't know, hates Israel, perhaps a racist, just comes out of another country, and now they're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. What I'm saying is, and you got one congressman up there said that Guam would tip over if too many people are on one side of it, and that's Johnson. And so, how would the brain trust ever get close to managing the rest of the country, managing us individually, when they have no idea what life really is, what it takes to even have a job? Most of them, in fact, somebody said in my Facebook feed, and put a meme through, it says, instead of investigating a billionaire who became a politician, we need to investigate politicians who became millionaires.
Right.
So, I mean, why can't we get smart people in there to make decisions? These people have no right to make decisions for the rest of us.
Right. And here's something to consider. I saw a piece on Nancy Pelosi, and I ran it on a segment that I was doing with InfoWars. And it was Nancy Pelosi talking to her colleagues about how you manipulate elections. And what she said is, first, and this is Nancy Pelosi, I mean, I can't believe the Speaker of the House saying this, that you first create a story that isn't true, and you give it to the media, who then reports the story. And then she says, then we merchandise the news reports, because now they can point to that. Well, see, the news said blah, 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 blah. And they knew it was a lie that they created. It's like the portfolio that Hillary Clinton's team put together to get the wiretaps on the Trump administration's, or prior to the Trump administration, during the election period, to try and influence all this nonsense. These are things that are criminal, okay? They're criminal. The idea, and it's not just coming out millionaires. Look at the Clintons. They came out billionaires, okay? Now, yeah, it's a trust, okay? It's a nonprofit. Okay, so it got 178 million last year and gave away 5 and has $1 billion raised from everybody they ever did a favor for anywhere in the world.
They built They built 3 or 4 houses in Haiti with $5 billion, didn't they? Well, that's something.
Right.
That's something.
Right. I'm sure they helped some construction jobs down there, and that was her foreign.
She helped her brother get a gold contract. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. I mean, it's endless. It's just endless. Okay. Now, when you think about all of this, and then there's pointing of the fingers at Russia for hacking the DNC. Okay, and what did they find out? They found out the DNC had rigged game, so all the Democrats in the country got to know that that was a rigged game, and Bernie was right. Okay, then they got to find out that it was really corrupt, and they were doing even more things. And then third, we got to find out that Hillary Clinton could have the state secrets. Might as well dump them to the world. Okay, well. So I think if it was the Russians, and I don't believe it was, but if it was, we should be saying thank you because, after all, one of the biggest political parties was as corrupt as could be. Now, on the other side, the Republican Party, who fielded 17 candidates and the 16 from the establishment, couldn't tread water to the maverick that showed up at the dance and became the president of the United States. And everybody's being so critical. I mean, the media, look at this craziness. And what did Trump do in the first 2 years? The lowest unemployment among minorities and everybody else, the best stock market, the highest economy, growth, double what Obama said it would ever be again. The medical things solved, U.S. corporations, foreign incomes finally taxed, biggest tax reform act since Ronald Reagan in 1980. He's getting NATO to pay part of their bill. He renegotiated NAFTA in Mexico and Canada in a few months. He got the Chinese at the bargaining table and has had at least a couple meetings with this nut job in Korea.
Right.
So I would say that's pretty good progress for a president in the first 2 years, considering what the media has done for him, which I should really say is done to him, because in the midst of all that, he's been beat up for being, okay, what's he been beat up for? A womanizer, having a bad personality, being rude, and swearing a lot. Well, we all knew that when he got elected, so that's nothing new. And as long as the electorate accepted that as sort of the baseline for Donald Trump, because we were sick and tired of having a wimp running the government. We needed somebody who was going to push back. It would have been nice to have a polite guy to push back that could punch in the eye and make you feel good about getting the punch. But we didn't. We got Donald Trump because he was authentic, you see. He was an authentic person. That's what people want. They wanted an honest, authentic person. Yeah, bruised up pretty good. But hey, this guy learned his trade in New York City. Go try and get in construction in New York City. Okay? That is a street fight from the beginning to the end. And that's who we got as president. Why would you expect anything differently than somebody in New York City fighting that street fight and becoming something out of it? And yep, he lost a lot. I'm sure he screwed up a lot, because anyone who ever did anything in this world did, except for these milquetoast politicians who never had a job and never started a business in their life. They got groomed by some special interest, captured out of college, put in the right place, the right time, given the right bonuses, and bounced into office because they could parrot whatever the parroting was, and they could read the script and take the money and do what they're told. But when you get a maverick in, they scare the hell out of everybody. And you see what's happened. The whole establishment has turned on him, and he's still getting stuff done.
Right. While he's getting stuff done, the other side is saying America's racist. And I guess there's a shortage of racists, because now they got to import them from Nigeria, man. I know. The last 10 racist things have been hoaxes. It's like they keep perpetuating this stuff over and over and over. That's kind of great. And think about this Omar witch. She's going around saying, money grumbling Israel supporters, basically an anti-Semite. And so the Democrats passed a resolution condemning the right. What are you talking about? How about just focusing
Right.
on the problem? So you really can't get to these people. There's some sort of insanity there. But let me ask you, doctor, the mind control sure does look like it's playing pretty good on that side of the aisle. Now that's not giving the Republicans any quarter, because look, man, low energy Jeb. I'm not a McCain supporter. I can, they
Right.
got goofy. Um, um, the guy looks like Frankenstein out there in Utah. Ran for president. Anyway, I got a whole bunch of my. I have no use for the Bushes. There's a whole
No.
bunch of them I don't care for. I just want
No.
somebody with common sense. But anyway, is that party more inclined to be on the precipice or the controlling edge of these mind control experiments because they're so
Here's
low IQ to begin with?
Here's how it goes. If you read the writing of Zbigniew Brzezinski in a book called Between Two Ages, he wrote it in 1973 when he was at Columbia University, before he became National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, and later one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission. And what he wrote in that book, which was Between Two Ages, and it was about technology, is he said no matter who was in charge, liberals or conservatives, they would be tempted to use this kind of technology to further their political ends, and that justification would be different. For Republicans, it would be about control. It would be about an orderly society. And that would be the rationale. And it was applied, that rationale, by those Republicans who advanced that technology in that direction. On the liberal side, it would be for your own good. It would be the nanny state approach of, hey, let us take care of this for you.
Mm-hmm.
That whole mindset. So the rationale would be different, but the fact is it still get applied. Now, who are the beneficiaries of this application? All those that would like to influence government and are paying for it. Those are the ones with access to influence and outcomes. Now, people, they look at Russia and they say, "Oh, Putin, it's a kleptocracy. They're stealing." What do you call it when these guys leave office and get billions of dollars? It's just a different set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
A different set of cultural acceptable rules. Because in Russia, I've been to Russia several times. You know what? Those are the rules in Russia. Now, they don't shoot each other in the street as often as we do in the United States like they used to. But, and they have a little bit more order out of their chaos. And the next generation will have even more structure out of the chaos. Because these guys came out of a communist system that told them capitalism is played by cheating and stealing and getting ahead of the other guy. It took them a generation to realize, hey, that's not how capitalism runs. It runs like this. Everybody has to win. Everybody has to profit, and everybody has to benefit in some way for the system to work. Mm-hmm. There's not just a bunch of losers and a bunch of winners. It's not like that. It's different. It's an economic system. It's not a political system. It's an economic system. That's what capitalism is. That's why the Chinese use capitalism, because it's a very efficient economic system. That's what they're using, and that's what we're using. But they're applying ownership of these companies and how they regulate and how they do that, much different than our game plan. Mm-hmm. That's why they can build a factory in a year while we're still running the permits for 6 years or 8 years or 10 years.
And again, it appears that Trump is trying to fix that problem too. But
right.
Are we gonna see President Bernie 2020, Doctor?
I hope not. I think the fact that Bernie is an avowed socialist, like if it had been Bernie and Trump last time, I think Bernie would have won, because socialism wasn't in the conversation at that point. And people, again, on the left, they wanted change too. That's why if they hadn't rigged it, he would have got the nomination, because the left wanted change for different reasons and the right wanted change for different reasons. So they were vesting in who they thought was authentic, even if they didn't like a lot of what they had to say. So I think it would have been different. Now, this time, I don't think so, because you got the nut from New York who has a $93 trillion plan, which is totally delusionary. It's not just about money. It's an impossibility. In fact, it reminds me, I worked in government at one time, and there was this guy working in the division that I was in, and he had overspent his budget. And my boss went in to see him, and I'm there, and he says, "What do you mean I'm out of money?" He goes, "I still have a box of POs." It didn't matter how many purchase orders you have that haven't been filled in. You have to have a budget attached to it. That's where this nut from New York is. Oh, we can just do it. I heard another one. It was a master's educated person in a protest line being interviewed saying, "How are we going to pay for all this? Free college, free health care, free everything." She goes, "Well, we'll get the government to pay for it." And the guy says, this interviewing, "Hey, but, that's from taxes that we pay." Well, then we'll pay some tax. We'll get the government to pay for the rest of it, she says. This is what's coming out of colleges today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't get it.
No.
And so I'm a little worried about that when I think of Bernie Sanders and the
Mm-hmm.
nut from New York. But, when I look at the population, the fact that this is all socialism, it's being openly discussed, I think that's the Democrats' death note. This is their crazy far left nut portion of their party activating. Just like the very, very, very far right, when they activate, they're pretty out there too. Because most Americans are neither Democrat nor Republican. They happen to be independents and registered as such or in other parties. That's the sweeping vast majority of the electorate. That's who we are. And we express ourselves that way. But that's not how the media plays it. They want identity politics, that which divides, that which separates, that which makes us hate each other. And that's what dissolves a society and a culture. That's not what we're about. We're about debate. We're about, if most of the people in the United States say they have a deep religious conviction that believes you're created in the image and likeness of God, that means we're divinely created, and we should treat each other that way in the dialogue and discourse, even when we strongly disagree. That's the platform our founding fathers had. We should treat each other this way in that clash of debate, but we should recognize our underlying divinity.
Well, I'll tell you what, though, AOC, she's also for a new space program, too. She says we can, she says we can land on the sun. We just have to land at night.
At night.
Yeah, if you land at night, we're good. All right, question. Let's get another question. It says, Doctor, do you correlate the evil confusion of this world to a group of entities that feed off dark, negative energy fields like pain, sadness, aggravation, and the like?
Okay, that's interesting. As an idea, and that's sort of that dark energy. Some religions personalize it. I think we all have that potential. I think we have choice. See, that's what makes us uniquely human. We get to decide. I think most people try to decide what they believe is good. Often we make mistakes. What we think was good turns out to be bad. Because I don't think most people go jump into something, I know this is screwed up, but I'm going to go do it. That doesn't happen so often, So I think when we find the flaws in ourselves, this is self-judgment, and we shouldn't be too harsh, because I think, again, if you believe you're divinely created in the image of divinity, don't be too hard on yourself. That's called blasphemy when you come against God in that way and God's creation in that way. It's called blasphemy. Be gentle with yourself, but be corrective. Fix it, just like you would your 2-year-old child, because I think that's how the creation and the Creator views us. Like that 2-year-old child, there's nothing you can do that's that screwed up, that can't be forgiven. But you need to grow. And that's the essence of it. The traumas in our lives are our opportunities to grow. The things that government doesn't like is growth and free thinking sovereign souls, because that's when divinity returns to earth and manifests in the world. And that's what's here now and coming.
Well, Doctor, you're in Alaska, correct?
That's right.
Are you near a HARP array?
The HARP array is about 250 miles east of me. But the bigger array that most people don't talk about is the Chinese array, which is 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers square. It's a full array. It's the one Bernard Eastlund, the original inventor, envisioned, one on that scale. So, these don't just exist in Alaska. They don't just exist in the ISACAT system in Canada or Europe. There are many arrays around the world by governments that understand the technology and are using it. The manipulation of the planet is part of that. The race in technology is so powerfully, I can't, how much is clouded by ideology right now? In other words, the few governments that are still sort of out there swirling around and fighting about it. But under that is that deep state. And it's not just here. It's a globalist deep state. Its tentacles ride through the world. Where I travel, I see the same things being played out within the culture that's there. They just throw the cultural overlay. I see it all over the world. Latin America, Europe, Asia, Eastern Europe, everywhere. Well, it's the same deal.
Isn't that what's going on in England? They voted for Brexit, but they can't get it? They just won't let them
Right.
have it. They won't let them have it.
Right, and it's just everyone's dragging their feet. Now, I'll say this about Russia and why they're trying to recreate a Cold War. I don't believe this is the same situation in Russia. You see, I think they do have an emerging capitalistic democracy that is maturing. They also have a strong esoteric side, understanding the essence of our humanity. We may see something quite different come out of Russia in the future, and I would be guarded when they try to make new enemies to create a new Cold War when one's unnecessary. Even if they hack the DNC, our government doesn't hack computers. We do regime change. Okay, let me say that again. We have 800 foreign bases in countries all over the world. Russia has one in Syria. We do regime change, ladies and gentlemen. If we don't like what's going on, we interfere with the election first. That doesn't work. We come in and clean out the leadership.
Man,
And then take over the country. That's what we do.
Talk about election collusion, man. It's not like the United States is doing it. What about 5G? Now, what are they really up to with that, Dr. Nick?
Well, it's the same basic thing. I mean, your 5G is the system for distributing telecommunications at a more rapid data rate. And the controversy come up is, will that affect us physiologically? The answer is yes. You're dealing with microwave radiation. I wrote the first article on cell phone safety and cell phone towers in the late 90s. It was published in Explorer magazine, and then Raman Zeit in Germany. And what I know about this is any electromagnetic carrier. And then a really good article on this that we cite in the book you have up on the screen, Controlling the Human Mind, is an article called The Mind Has No Firewalls. And essentially it says any electromagnetic carrier, the internet, cell phones, the power grid even, can be oscillated or modulated in such a way as to influence human behavior. The resolution of that, or the ability to implement more than just like emotional state, that takes more sophisticated software and programming, the kinds of things that we're now seeing coming that are here now, and actually this generation. And it just required computing power to catch up and modeling to catch up. And now when you add in AI and some of these other technologies that allow them to sort of self-teach and grow from there, we are in really an interesting place in history. The military, DARPA in particular, had 2 contracts, one for analyzing the radiations emanating from the human brain in order to interpret specific thoughts. And the other was then to take those emanations and replicate them through a broadcast system, see if you could transfer those directly into another person. That's called electronic telepathy. And these contracts were let 6 years ago to the University of California to test those ideas. But there were earlier studies done in the 70s that took people and actually created apparatus to transfer between 2 individuals specific thoughts with 100% accuracy in 9 test subjects. I saw the studies. I know the people that ran those studies, and they are, in fact, world-class in their science fields of biophysics. This is the fact that we have these technologies, the fact that we also have these natural attributes. This is where the good and the evil in it come in, right? This is what your last question was really referring to. There are those that would really like for this not to happen, for us not to, and I don't use the word evolve into this because it's the opposite. It's remembering what we are as creative human beings and what attributes we have and begin to demonstrate them. When we remember that again and we begin to do that again, these power structures fall very rapidly. That's the next revolution of humankind, and that's where the science and the counter side to this science is taking us, and that's sort of the metaphysical side of the scientific inquiry. And now what you're seeing is a challenge. Do we empower individuals to be more strongly individual, or do we do the opposite? And that's the challenge of this generation with our technology.
Well, it seems that China is manipulating their populations through social media scoring. And,
right.
And I know Canada is beginning to roll out some kind of form of that theirself. So is it that they don't have the technology to roll it out through, say, a 5G network or through brain projection from a satellite somehow to get the results that they need? They have to have these sort of on the ground remedial type of things because the larger technology is not working?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but you still want creativity. You still want, you don't want a zombie culture, for goodness sake. It's better to target individuals that are disruptive to what your plan is, right? And in China, what the social scoring is about is that it's controlling behavior by direct interaction with individuals and creating a cultural context where you don't misbehave. Your picture's on the wall, people walk by you and it flashes on their cell phone. Oh, there's the jerk. There's the jerk, and then you deal with you're the jerk, right? So this is pretty powerful, so, and actually we are doing it in the West. We're doing it through Google and Facebook and YouTube and others, but they're using it commercially and politically to push us in their liberal leaning direction and to limit the voices of those that don't go along and, to script the message that you want to hear for the guys they want you to hear from. So this is already happening. It's just not called social scoring in the West. It's called advertising. It's called collecting data. It's called kicking in your digital doorway and robbing you of what your essence in terms of information is. That's what that is really in the West. The Chinese are a little more honest about it. They just say, hey, we're social scoring. If you don't behave, we're going to give you either the 15-cent bullet in the head or something less than that, depending on what you're doing. And they do it.
I've been trying to get in Facebook jail for over a year and a half. Do you got any tips?
No,
any tips for me?
I went on Facebook for 4 days just to see what it was about, and I never could figure out how to get out of it. And LinkedIn, I did the same thing. I went up and did part of it, and then I never finished. I just went, I don't want any part of this, and I get all these things coming to me from these guys every once in a while, because I guess there's a whole list of people who like to join my Facebook, but if they looked, I don't have any friends. I'm not having any friends there because it's crazy to me to just volunteer. I do it enough by just having the interface I do just to function in this culture. But to sign up for more of it and more distraction, nope. I prefer to be educated, self-empowered, and do that for others.
Well, it seems like I know a lot of people who's been in Facebook jail, so I kind of feel left out, man. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So
I don't think we're missing anything.
Okay.
And here's the thing. There was a segment I did for Alex Jones, and it was meant to be a 10-minute segment. Turned into 45 minutes. Called he titled it. He gets to title them, and it was "Breaking the Zombie Trance." And there's still a link on my website at earthpulse.com, and it's on the front page. And it'll take you to somebody else because Infowars they took that one down too. But it's up there, and it's "Breaking the Zombie Trance." It's on the front page of earthpulse.com, and click on it. It's free. But it's a way to perceive some of this and some of sort of where I come from in the nature of framing debate, because I've been in debate my whole life. Because you're raised in a political environment, you're just there. And in my family, we got Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, and everything in between. And ideologically committed. So we get together for Christmas, and if you're from the outside looking in, it's free for all. But when we leave, we embrace each other, and we would fight to the death for the right to speak of any one of my siblings. And this is the character that I'm talking about. And I do it in my own family. I mean, we can do this as a nation. We should do this again. This is what did make America great. It's the way we treated each other. And that's what can make America great again. And Donald Trump brings us into focus because a lot of times he doesn't treat people very well. But I say that with the balance in mind. Sometimes you got to be a little tougher. We've had a lot of wimps in there. The Bushes,
sure.
and the Clintons and the Obama. And these guys are wimps because they were there for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
People complain about Putin. He was involved in the KGB. He wasn't the head of the KGB. He was some low functioning guy. George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA, and we allowed him to be president. We all know the cranky, creepy crap of the CIA that we've read about over the last 50 years since they first formed them. And this guy ran the show for dark projects, and we elected him president. We got appointed Putin as some low-level functionary. Come on.
We know Bush is on that grassy knoll.
Right.
He was there. And besides how could we ever have a president that wears mom jeans, man? We're supposed to be tough to present a tough posture to the world. If you're running around wearing mom's jeans, forget it, man. Nobody going to believe you.
Well, I got to say this is the ideas ultimately, that need to be debated because there's too much. This is what I see too with both parties. Too much parroting going on, not enough thinking going on. And the way the parroting stops is by listening to our opposition, figure out why they come to the conclusions they come to, because people don't come to conclusions for no reason. They come to conclusions for reason. Knowing what they are helps us frame our discussion, because it tells us what they don't know that we might, or what they know that we might not know. Mm-hmm. This is how discourse evolves into solutions, because then we're talking about solutions, and that's where solutions happen.
Okay, well that is good. So where would this country begin? Do we need to find leaders on both sides, and how we because that's what we would need, leaders on both sides to stop first of all, stop the investigations. Okay, that's those aren't investigations and oversight. That's retribution. That's what that is.
Right.
So, but they would have to drop that. And for one, so
we need to elect better people, absolutely, and we need to start looking at the mavericks, even if they are a little bit, rough around the edges.
You mean like
and I
Omar?
voted for Donald Trump. My family went nuts on the Democratic side. My son and I were the only ones in my family that did, and I believed he was going to win from the beginning, because I was sick of the status quo. I was sick of being lied to. I was sick to death of having somebody feed me BS and try and call it fertilizer. And what I knew from Donald Trump was nobody owned him. And I believe that. And whatever he was doing in business, I believe that too, but I don't think anything was hidden. His tax returns were hidden. He might have been a little embarrassed about taking some big write-downs. But those are the tax codes that exist, and he started to reform them with the biggest tax reform act. And it didn't benefit him to start taxing his foreign income, I can assure you. Mm-hmm. It didn't benefit him to tax himself at that level, but he did.
Well, he honestly presented himself as somebody who knows how to use the system, because the system makes it available to do.
Yeah, let me tell you what Mitt Romney did, which is a guy from Utah you were trying to think about. He did what I call the Mitt Romney Roth, and here's how that works.
Okay.
He made too much money to have a Roth, but anyone can have a non-deductible traditional IRA, which is what he did. And he put his $6,500 a year in it, or $5,500, how old he was, and then he could roll that over into a Roth. Okay, then that Roth, all of what it earns is non-taxable. So with that little bit of Roth money, he formed a Bahamas corporation. He then loaned that Bahamas corporation $400 million, I believe it was, and it went out and made millions and millions and millions of dollars. And now he, because it's through his Roth that wholly owned that Bahamas corporation, he disclosed it all. It was all perfectly legal. But all the earnings from that Roth are tax-free. What a loophole. You could drive that through that loophole with a 747 and a freight train dragged behind it. And so Obama closed that loophole. So now he can only repatriate $3 million a year in that tax-free money. Shame on you, Mitt. Boy, that felt hard. Didn't that feel rough on you? What a hacking of the intent of the statute for your own benefit. And he wants to be president. And he's probably going to be one of the first ones to point at Donald Trump for something. Mm-hmm. This guy did use the system too, gamed it too. I call it the Mitt Romney retirement plan. Anybody with enough money out there hearing it, go do it, because these are the rules. And if you want to do it and win, you better do it by the rules of the winners. And these are guys that we need to really ask ourselves, wait a minute. I'll tell you, the other one is the mineral industry. I'm in the mineral industry. I can make money in the mineral industry. And you know what? Half of the net profit in the mineral industry you get to offset by a little trick of accounting they started in 1913 when they invented the income tax and this tax. And it's called depletion allowances. So only half of the profit is taxed. So my effective yield on my international is 7.5%. Now my domestic is 10% corporate tax on that, or private tax on that, because depletion applies whether it's partnership, proprietorship, corporation, C Corp, S Corp, doesn't matter. So the rules need to be rethought. The platform and complexity of the rules needs to be rethought, because most things have simple solutions if you can get Basiloff. It's like the income tax. Income tax started where it only affected 2 or 3% of the population. If you made under $25,000 in 1913, you didn't pay any. And if you made over $25,000 a year, which would be 60 times that amount today, okay, $500,000 a year, you paid 2%, right? And then it escalated to 6% as the top of the tax rate in 1913. Mm-hmm. But the oil and gas and minerals industry got depletion allowances to soften the blow for them. They never changed the laws. In over 106 years, they never changed that law. So people benefit by it. I'm one of the beneficiaries. Is that a good thing? I don't think so for the country. It's good for me. It's not good for the country.
How would we know if, even in this conversation, that I said what I said to you or you said what I said to me? How do we know that HARP or some other technologies got inside and interfered and took the place of our real legitimate conversation? How could we ever tell the difference if we're being programmed that way?
This is not how these systems work. Think about it like a push-pull, you know? They push you in a direction that you're generally going to head anyway. To go something completely contrary into who you are, this requires a very different approach. They've done it. There's a guy named Esterbrook who did this. He was able to do it over about a year period with direct hypnosis on about 20% of the people that were tested, and could create a whole synthetic personality that would be totally different than the waking
haven't a lot
personality,
of
if you will.
killers and psychos always said they've heard voices? I mean, isn't there voice to
Right.
skull technology?
Right, right. In fact, many people don't know. It was reported in the New York Times. You know, the Unabomber. Remember the Unabomber blowing up academics and people doing technology? Well, he was actually an MK Ultra experimental victim. The record shows it. You know, that was, a lot of these guys were really close to these programs. And so the question is, was it the program or was it them? This is where the secrecy syndrome needs to be ripped apart. That's what the Church Committee was trying to do in the early 1970s in the Congress, when it exposed the abuses of the CIA and the MK Ultra programs. Well, these programs never ended. A lot of them shifted over to DARPA. They shifted over to the Navy. They shifted over to the Air Force and other branches of the government under new names and new programs, new budgets, new BS for the Americans to underwrite. But these technologies did not slow down. They sped up. And as they become known, you look at what's been released. Look at my website and see what was released by FOIA requests under DARPA of psychotronic warfare using these unusual capabilities as systems of war. A lot of countries engage in this and still do. This is serious business. The idea of manipulating the operator, the human being, is the ultimate frontier of the new science, whether it's for commercial, political, or other purposes. How do you know the difference? To switch it off that much would be tremendous, but to push population as easy as creating a level of discomfort and disease when you're running the 6 o'clock news feed, where you orient that towards one group or the other, or towards a Trump, or towards a Korea, or a Palestinian, or whoever it is you want to target that week. That's as simple as it is. To push enough of the population in that direction, that's all it is. That's all it needs to be. Otherwise, it's preemption. You make a guy look totally nuts. You have him break down in public, hear voices in public. Well, that guy's out. So you can target an individual, but you would do that against leaders, people you wanted to neutralize credibility-wise, that you want to bring to their knees. And you might even experiment it on a little bit to show the other side you got it too, like what happened in Cuba and China with some of our folks over there at various junctures where they became confused and disoriented, or during the Nixon administration in his visits to Russia and the microwaving of the U.S. Embassy during his administration. Same thing.
I think they may have nuked AOC's brain, because I think the other day she said bread goes in a toaster and toast comes out, but where does the bread go? I'm just wondering.
This is it's just when you think about this poor individual and how she's being manipulated. The other thing that came out on her is the way they funneled money in to enrich her so she would be positioned to be a politician. This is the level of corruption I'm talking about. It's all within the rules, all perfectly acceptable, but this is the kind of thing we all need to be talking about, because should it be acceptable? Should there be rules that allow this? Should any of this exist? And this is a question never gets asked. It's just, they've complied. Well, complied with what, and who set it up, and who rigged the game? Because it is a rigged game. My family's got 3 generations in this game on the international, national, local level. I can tell you it plays out all the same. And the ones that disrupt the system at this point are those that are informing people and empowering people again, not giving them fear and lack of a sense of self, but the opposite, because it's individuals that will change this. It'll be our individual choices that change this. And then that collectively forms something, not the other way around. You don't form a collective and then go make things happen. It happens the other way around.
Somebody wants to know who is Q? Is that disinfo there, Doctor?
I don't know. I've followed that in and out, but I don't know. It could be. Here's how I look at all of it. Don't get sucked into any particular information channel. Challenge and question and review and critically examine, and don't look at because someone claims it's a conspiracy theory. That was actually put forward by intelligence organizations, a way to kill debate. Just throw that in the mix and the debate's over. And it works pretty effectively. Quit letting that work. Conspiracy is when two people are in a room talking about something you don't agree with. That's called a conspiracy. Now you can expand that concept any way you want to, but that's how it is.
Pretty basic.
And everybody does it. You conspire to raise your kids. You conspire to educate them. You conspire for who you're going to vote for. Because someone doesn't agree with you.
Somebody wants to know, is CERN a dimensional gateway?
I hear that too. And this what, we're playing with advanced particle physics in CERN, trying to figure out, the essence of creation, really. I don't know if I'd see it that way. I don't have enough depth of knowledge to interpret CERN to that level. I can say this about high technology generally. When you get into systems like this that are literally messing with the framework of reality, go slow. During the atomic age, the beginning of that, some believe we'd rip the whole atmosphere off the planet, but the guys tried it anyway. Go slow. They wanted to blow up, create bays and harbors using atomic and nuclear weapons in Alaska, which would have totally wiped out the North Slope and our ability to produce oil and gas there had they done this. They could have really ruined it. So let's not be too fast to jump on board of every technology trend, particularly the ones that are big science. And so with CERN, I would say if people are raising these cautions, let's consider the credibility of those raising the caution, make sure they're being examined carefully.
So you're thinking I should stop investigating flat Earth?
Yeah. Well,
would that be a place to start, or
I think there's a point. But I'll tell you something interesting is, when you raise that, you laugh about it. But the New York Times, so somebody sent me a stack of articles about this thick from the early 1900s from the New York Times about the explorations going on in Antarctica and about them finding, dry ground and plants and animals and all this stuff that wasn't supposed to be there. Now, why was the New York Times reporting it? I got the file, you can look it up, go back to the microfilms and start looking it up. There's some weird things have been reported that don't make sense. There's a lot of anomalies in archaeology. It's one of my areas of interest, that are reported periodically. There's a lot of oddities that don't line up with the scientific profile, including the latest archaeological finds 10,000 years old in Turkey that aren't supposed to be there. We weren't supposed to be able to know how to do this stuff. I don't think we know diddly. Okay, that's what I know, because man has been around a very long time, and the window of our observation is about 6,000 years. This planet could have rebuilt itself several times and probably has. If you look at climate change even as a debate, that the oceans 12,000 years ago were 350 feet lower. Look it up. That's 3 feet every 100 years. Guess what? That's a projection for the next 100. It's the average of what it's been for the last 12,000. We didn't do it. Nobody was burning oil when the mastodons were running around. The Earth is a powerful system that changes, alters, and we don't know diddly yet.
I would certainly agree with that. Hey, being in Alaska, man, can you see Russia from your house?
Not from here, but there is one point where there are about 20 Little Diomede and Diomede Island are segregated by just a small area. I think there's times when you can see one of the islands from the other, but no. You can't see Russia from here. But put this in perspective, how big is Alaska? We're 18% of the United States landmass, but our coastline, Gulf Coast, East Coast, and West Coast of the United States combined is not greater than the Alaska coastline. And we have a 200-mile limit, a federal limit in that coastline, which means our offshore continental shelf in terms of oil and gas resources, mineral resources, tremendous. We are the balance sheet, something no one looks at in the United States. They look at the profit and loss statement, income in, income out, taxes in, spending out. They never look at the assets we hold in common. But if you do, Alaska holds the keys to the national debt. We have all of the resources that we own jointly on federal lands that are ours, that we are giving away to multinationals on a wholesale basis. Most Americans are unaware of it. I see it every day, and I've watched it my entire life. The generations before me in this state saw it, starting with the Morgan banking family and the Guggenheims, with the early copper discoveries here in Alaska, later oil and gas and other discoveries, fishing, timber, all of it. The British Petroleum, 25% owned by the British Crown when oil and gas was discovered on the North Slope, and they took control of half of that oil and gas.
Are Alaskans generally in favor of Trump opening up the oil reserves there?
Absolutely. It's a joint between Republicans and Democrats here. We just passed a resolution in our state Senate with 2 dissenters out of the entire Senate.
Because a bunch of tree-hugging bastards down there in California didn't want that to happen, man. Hey,
that's exactly it.
Hey, we're right kind of at the end of the broadcast, but I want to see if you want to answer this last question. It's from Gladys Kravis Jr., and you don't have to answer this question, but it says, Dr. Nick, can you briefly speak about the strange disappearance of your father?
Yeah, I can. There's material on my website. You can look at it. The plane went down. It was never located officially. Later, it came out with the FOIA request out of the FBI that they knew where it was, and they let my father and the Majority Leader, Hale Boggs, die in the wilderness. That's what happened. Unfortunately, that truth never got told. But that is what happened to my father. Was it a conspiracy? It was a peak of the Nixon administration 3 weeks before Watergate. Think about his players and you tell me, was it a conspiracy or was it pretty convenient when the Majority Leader of the U.S. House, third in line to be President of the United States, had things played out a little bit differently? The game would have been much different in the early 70s, and the country would be much different today in 2019.
Wow. Sorry to hear that. Well, I'll tell you, we are at the end of the broadcast. Dr. Nick Begich, anything you'd like to say? Any final closing thoughts?
Hey, I appreciate it. Check out my website, earthpulse.com. There's a lot of material there. Most of it, information is free. Support us if you want. Buy one of our books and pass the information on. We appreciate the airtime, and thank you for giving us a chance to talk to your listening audience.
All right. Appreciate you coming on. Can we have you on again sometime?
Absolutely. Maybe in a few months we'll do it again.
Okay. Very good. Doctor, stay safe up there in Alaska.
You too. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.